In the first lecture, we looked at the political shape of empire. We saw how it differs from old fashioned imperialism. We learned about biopower and the society of control. But we only saw half the picture. We stayed on the surface. Now we must go deeper. Karl Marx once said, we have to leave the noisy sphere of exchange. We have to descend into the hidden abode of production. That is where the real action is. That is where exploitation happens. That is where resistance begins. Let us look at how production has changed. Let us see how the struggles of workers have shaped the world. Let us ask, can the multitude build a new world inside the shell of the old? To understand empire, we must first understand why old style imperialism failed. Marx showed that capitalism has a built in problem. Workers produce more value than they get paid. That surplus value must be sold. But workers cannot buy back everything they make. They are too poor. Capitalists cannot buy everything either. They need to save money to invest. So, who buys the surplus? Someone outside the system. Capitalism needs non capitalist markets. It needs peasants, colonized peoples, and traditional societies. It needs an outside. Rosa Luxemburg developed this idea. She said, capitalism is like a vampire. It cannot live on its own. It must suck the blood of non capitalist societies. It needs primitive accumulation again and again. Imperialism was the political form of this need. European nations carved up Africa, Asia, and the Americas. They created colonies, they forced open markets, and they turned peasants into wage laborers. They destroyed traditional ways of life. All of this provided the outside that capital needed. But here is the problem: imperialism creates fixed boundaries. Each nation claims its own colony. Each nation sets up tariffs and trade barriers. Each nation protects its own monopolies. These boundaries help capital at first. They keep competitors out. They guarantee cheap raw materials. They provide safe markets. Eventually, however, the boundaries become barriers. Capital wants to flow freely everywhere. It does not like walls. It wants one global market without restrictions. But imperialism keeps putting up walls. So capital must eventually destroy imperialism. The world market cannot be fully realized until the old colonial system is smashed. This is the internal contradiction of imperialism. It creates the very thing that will kill it. Lenin saw this. He knew that World War I was a war between imperialist powers. They were fighting over how to divide the world. Lenin thought this crisis would lead to revolution. He was partly right, but he was also partly wrong. The crisis led to something else. It led to the beginning of empire. Marx planned to write 3 more volumes of Capital. One was on the wage, one was on the state, one was on the world market. He never wrote them. Why? Because the conditions were not ready. The nation state was still too powerful. The world market was not yet real. Hardt and Negri argue now the conditions are ready. The nation state is declining. The world market is here. We can finally write those missing volumes. The volume on the wage would be about biopolitical production. The volume on the state would be about imperial sovereignty. The volume on the world market would be about the society of control. We are living inside those missing volumes. After World War II, United States was the only major economy still standing. Europe and Japan were in ruins. The US used this power to create a new global order. This order was based on the New Deal. The New Deal was Franklin Roosevelt's program to reform American capitalism. It had 3 parts. First, Fordism. This was a system of mass production. Factories made huge quantities of identical products. Workers repeated the same simple task all day. Second, Taylorism. This was a system of scientific management. Experts studied every movement of the worker. They timed every action. They broke work down into tiny pieces. The goal was maximum efficiency. Third is Keynesianism. This was a system of economic management. The government spent money to create demand. It built highways, schools, and hospitals. It provided unemployment benefits and retirement pensions. This kept the economy stable. Together, these three systems created a disciplinary society. Workers were disciplined in the factory, students were disciplined in schools, citizens were disciplined by the welfare state. Everything had its place, everything followed a routine. The US exported this model around the world. Through the Marshall Plan, it rebuilt Europe in its image. Through the Bretton Woods agreements, it made the dollar the world currency. Through the World Bank and the IMF, it forced developing countries to adopt its economic policies. Decolonization helped this process. The old colonial powers were pushed out, but they were replaced by transnational corporations. These corporations set up factories everywhere. They brought Fordism and Taylorism to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The goal was a global factory society. Every worker in the world would be interchangeable. Everyone would follow the same discipline. Everyone would want the same products. This was the dream of modernization. It was also a nightmare. Millions of peasants were driven off their lands. Millions of workers were herded into crowded slums. Traditional cultures were destroyed, but the system kept growing. Primitive accumulation is a process of creating new proletarians. It separates workers from their land, their tools, and their communities. It forces them to sell their labor for a wage. In the past, primitive accumulation was physical. It was about enclosures, evictions, and slavery. Today, it is informational and biopolitical. Think about it. Every time you use a free app, you are giving away your data. That data is collected and sold. You are producing value for free. Your social life becomes raw material for capital. Your relationships become commodities. This is the new primitive accumulation. It does not just take your land, it takes your very self. It produces social relationships and sells them back to you. The disciplinary regime did not go unchallenged. In the 1960s and 70s, the multitude rose up. In Vietnam, peasants and guerrillas defeated the most powerful military on earth. Their victory was a symbol. It showed that empire could be wounded. In the United States, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the feminist movement, and the anti war movement all exploded. Students occupied universities, workers went on strike, women demanded control over their bodies. In Europe, May 1968 paralyzed France. Workers and students built barricades. Factories were occupied. The government almost fell. In Italy, the hot autumn of 1969 saw massive strikes. Workers demanded better pay and shorter hours. In China, the Cultural Revolution tried to smash the bureaucratic state. In Pakistan, workers rose up against military rule. These struggles were different. They did not just demand better wages, they demanded a new way of life. They refused the discipline of the factory, the school, and the family. They wanted creativity, mobility, and freedom. The central demand of these struggles was the refusal of work. Workers did not want better jobs, they wanted to work less, they wanted to work differently, they wanted to escape work entirely. This was not laziness, this was a political act. The disciplinary regime depended on workers accepting their role. It depended on them showing up every day. It depended on them following orders. When workers refused, the whole system shook. Productivity fell, profits dropped. The state had to step in. It raised wages, it expanded welfare, it tried to buy off the rebels. But the rebels kept pushing. They demanded a social wage. They said that everyone should have enough to live, whether they worked or not. They wanted to separate life from labor. This was a revolutionary idea, it is still. The Soviet Union failed for the same reason. It was stuck in the disciplinary model. It had Fordism and Taylorism. It had a welfare state, but it could not adapt to the new forms of labor. Soviet workers also began to refuse. They stopped showing up. They did shoddy work. They stole from the factory. The system could not respond. It was too rigid. It was too centralized. It was too old. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was not just a political collapse, it was the collapse of a whole model of production. The Soviet system could not make the leap to immaterial labor, so it died. Today, the economy is dominated by immaterial labor. This is labor that produces not things but ideas, services, communication, and affects. There are three types. First, computerized industrial labor. Factories are now full of computers. Workers monitor screens instead of handling materials. Manufacturing becomes a form of information processing. Second, symbolic and analytical labor. This is the work of programmers, designers, consultants, and researchers. They solve problems, they create knowledge, they manipulate symbols. Third, affective labor. This is the production of feelings. It is the work of nurses, therapists, teachers, and childcare workers. It is also the work of entertainers and social media influencers. Affective labor produces community, connection, and care. These three types of labor are increasingly dominant. They are also deeply cooperative. You cannot produce affects alone. You cannot create knowledge alone. Immaterial labor requires communication, collaboration, and trust. The old assembly line is dead. In its place is the network. Networks are decentralized, they are flexible, they can grow and shrink as they need it. They connect people across the world in real time. This has two effects. First, production becomes mobile. Capital can move anywhere. It can close a factory in Detroit and open it elsewhere overnight. Workers lose their bargaining power. They cannot strike if the boss can just leave. Second, control becomes centralized. Even as factories spread out, command centers cluster together. Global cities like New York, London, and Tokyo manage the whole system. Finance, law, and advertising all concentrate there. The real power is not on the shop floor, it is in the skyscraper. Empire is not chaos, it has a structure. Hardt and Negri compare it to the old Roman constitution. First, there is monarchy. This is the US monopoly on military force. The bomb is the ultimate weapon, it guarantees the unity of empire. Second, there is aristocracy. This is the power of transnational corporations and the G7 nations. They control money, they decide where investments go, they set the rules of global economy. Third, there is democracy. This is the power of NGOs, the media, and humanitarian organizations. They control communication, they shape public opinion, they represent the people. These three powers are not separate, they are hybridized. The military works with corporations. Corporations fund NGOs. NGOs advise the military. They all blend together. Together, they control the production of subjectivity itself. They decide what you think, what you want, and who you are. We have reached a turning point. There is no outside, there is no place to stand that is not already inside empire. This changes politics. We cannot fight by building a separate world. We cannot retreat to the local. We cannot wait for the revolution to come from somewhere else. We must fight from within. We must fight on the terrain of empire itself. We must use its tools against it. This is the ontological turn. Politics becomes about being itself. It becomes about what kind of world we want to produce together. Here is the secret. Empire has no power of its own. It is a parasite. It lives off the multitude. The multitude produces everything. We produce goods, ideas, relationships, and communities. We produce love, cooperation, and joy. Empire just captures these products. It takes what we make and sells it back to us. It takes our cooperation and turns it into profit. It takes our desires and turns them into commodities. Empire is an empty machine. It is a vampire. It is a parasite. Without the multitude, it would wither and die. This is our strength. We are the host. We have the power. We only need to realize it. The multitude has three great powers. First, exodus. We can leave. We can walk away from the places of power. We can desert the factory, the office, and the nation. This is not just physical movement, it is also mental and emotional. We can refuse to believe the lie. We can refuse to play the game. Second, nomadism. We can keep moving. We can refuse to be fixed in one identity, one place, or one role. We can be multiple, fluid, and hybrid. This is not confusion, it is freedom. Third, miscegenation. We can mix. We can break down the boundaries of race, gender, sexuality, and nation. We can create new identities and new communities. We can become something that has never existed before. These powers are already at work. Every migrant who crosses a border is exercising exodus. Every queer person who refuses the binary is practicing miscegenation. Every freelancer who works from a coffee shop is living nomadism. We just need to become conscious of these powers. We need to organize them. We need to turn them into a political force. Hardt and Negri end with three demands. First, global citizenship. This is the right to control our own movement. We should be able to go anywhere, live anywhere, and work anywhere. No nation should be able to lock us in and keep us out. We should have papers for all. Second, a social wage. This is a right to a guaranteed income. We should not have to work to live. Our lives are valuable in themselves. We should be free to produce, create, and care without the threat of starvation. This is a right to reappropriate our own time. Third, reappropriation of the means of production. The means of production today are not factories and machines, they are knowledge, information, communication, and affects. We must control them. We must own our own data. We must run our own networks. We must produce our own culture. This is the right to reappropriate our own selves. Who will lead this struggle? Not the old parties, not the old unions. They are too tied to the disciplinary regime. The new political subject is the militant. The militant does not follow orders. The militant does not wait for instructions. The militant acts creatively, collectively, and joyfully. Hardt and Negri use the Latin word posse. It means power as a verb. It means the power to act, to create, and to be. The posse is the multitude in motion. It is a group that makes itself. The posse is not an army. It is not a party. It is more like a band. It is more like a crew. It is a temporary alliance of singularities. It comes together for a task. It dissolves when the task is done. It reforms for the next fight. This is how the multitude organizes, not through hierarchy, not through representation, but through direct cooperation and shared desire. The old left wanted to resist globalization. It wanted to build walls. It wanted to return to the nation state. This is a mistake. We must not resist globalization. We must push through it. We must go further than capital dares to go. We must take its networks and turn them to our own ends. We must take its communication tools and use them to organize. We must take its mobility and use it to escape. The old world is dying. The disciplinary regime is crumbling. The nation state is fading. The old imperialisms are gone. A new world is struggling to be born. It is a world of the multitude. It is a world of cooperation, love, and joy. It is a world of exodus, nomadism, and miscegenation. It is a world of the posse. Empire is a parasite. It cannot live without us. If we withdraw our cooperation, it will starve. If we refuse to produce for it, it will collapse. If we build our own networks alongside it, it will become irrelevant. Thank you.